None of us are above the possibility of having to take a life in self-defense. But what can we expect after that? That's what we're going to be talking about in this video. Stick around. A lot of people carry things with them every day for self-defense, and many are prepared to use these things if they're in a life-threatening situation. I can't help but wonder, though, how many are thinking beyond that point. I say that because if we did, I think we would curve a lot of the things that we say in confidence, and I think that we would be a lot more realistic and apprehensive about those situations. The more I think about what's to follow a self-defense situation where there is a fatality, the more I hope and pray that I am never in that situation. But hoping and praying not to be in those kinds of situations doesn't change the world that we live in, and it doesn't change our potential of being in a situation like that. So we've got to be prepared not only to defend ourselves, but we've also got to be prepared for what's to come. The first phase is obviously the incident itself. The incident means that we believed our life was in danger and we made the decision to use a firearm, a knife, whatever it was we had to take the life of that assailant. As I've said this before, this is where pride and ego and temper and all of that has to be pushed aside, and we have to make that decision based on the clear assessment that our life or our family's life was truly in danger had we not acted. We have a very short amount of time to make sure that we're making the best decision possible, because after the initial incident, there's no turning back. So if you have to make that decision based on the fact that no matter what happens, you knew you did what you had to do. The second phase is the immediate aftermath. It's just you and the assailant, or you and whatever remains. It's in that situation, you have to make sure the threat is clear. You can't move forward beyond that point. You've got to make sure that the threat has been dealt with. You've got to make sure there's no other dangers coming your way. You've got to stand your ground until the dust settles, as much as you can tell. And we don't move to phase 3 until we are sure of that. Phase 3 is making the call. It's time to call 911. You want to keep your statement very simple. I felt like my life was threatened. I had to take action and defend myself. Please send the police and an ambulance. I got the idea about requesting an ambulance from an article I read similar to this situation. And, asking for not only the police, but also an ambulance shows actually some concern for the assailant. It doesn't, appear that you just, was happy to take the life of somebody and leave them dead on the floor. Another common perception is that innocent people make the call, whereas the bad guys try to avoid the law. But again, just keep your statement very simple. I feared for my life and I had to defend myself, plain and simple. The first impressions that we leave with, every contact we make, is going to play a big part in how this plays out. The next thing I'm going to mention is not a next phase. It's just kind of something that falls under this umbrella, and that is, if you have any type of self-defense liability insurance, you would make that call right then and there as well. For example, I'm a USCCA member, so after I called 911, I would call the critical response team, and it also gives you instructions with regards to how to respond to the arriving officers. Phase 4, you can expect the police to arrive, and you should comply with their orders. And it's very important to note that you should be very limited with regards to what you say. Do not start babbling off a bunch of details. Your testimony with them remains the same. You felt like your life was in danger and that you had to defend yourself. And I would be as respectful as possible and avoid all slang when talking to the officers, because remember, we did what we had to do to defend ourselves. We don't want to boast in anything we did or come across that way whatsoever. Again, just comply with their orders, One of the reasons why it's so important not to just keep talking and saying so much is that you got to think you're going through a lot of trauma in that situation, and you've got a lot of post-trauma stress, and you're not going to be thinking as clearly as you need to think. So your statement is very simple. The only thing that's relevant is what the assailant did, any immediate evidence laying around, and immediate witnesses. And you need to expect to be arrested and taken in, which leads us to our fifth point, and that is you need to speak with your attorney next before you go any further. And the sixth phase is the possibility of this going to trial. And this is where it becomes sobering and disturbing, because so many people who believed that they did what they had to do and did the right thing still ended up going to jail for what they did. It just doesn't always work out in our favor. And this has to be the reality that holds us accountable. That's as far as we're going to go in this video. There's a whole lot we could say about these points. There's a whole lot more we could dive into, but I don't want to inundate you with too much information in one video. But these are the phases you can expect to walk through in the aftermath of a situation. And when we really think about these things, it sobers us up. You know, we carry a lot of our weapons with pride and dignity because depending upon where we live, we have that right. But the last thing we ever want to do is use these things. Carrying around weapons is a necessary evil. Taking a life in self-defense is a necessary evil. But the last thing we need to be doing is walking around flexing over this stuff, because if you ever have to do this, it will change your life forever, regardless of the outcome. Self-defense training is not always about how to fight and how to kill. It's how to deal with reality and how to avoid and how to live in peace. It's knowing the implications that are ahead of us if we have to use our weapons and our skills, which again puts the importance back onto situational awareness. As I've said before, this is not the movies. This is real life. The next scene looks a whole lot different in the real world than it does in the movies most of the time. Train to protect yourself and your family, but be well aware of what will follow afterwards. I'd love to hear from you in the comments, especially if you have been through something like this. I love to hear testimonies in the comments because we can learn so much from what other people have been through. You know, there's this phrase that says we learn from our mistakes. Well, sometimes we can learn from other people's mistakes, but I'd love to hear from you if you have anything to add, as long as you're being nice. I'm just playing. Say what you got to say. Take care.